I'm Sasha Reinhardt. I am the Eastern Region Auditor, Field Staff. I go by many names, probably not all of them good, for the eastern part of the state. So everything from Lexington East is me. A lot of you are in my region, so you're familiar to me. Some of you are not. That's okay too. This form and this process is the same all across the state. So what we're going to do today, and several of you I think have been not only audited in the last few years, but have been in this training before. So it's awesome to see you here again, because even if you're familiar with this, even if you've been through audits recently, there is always something to learn, always something new to implement. So hopefully, if this is new to you, I will not confuse you. And if it is not new to you, hopefully you will learn something today. I taught for a long time with Miss Christina up here, actually. And so I'm very used to not just, I taught middle school, so you can't stand in front of them and talk for hours and hours. So I'm still not really comfortable with the whole like sit and get process. So if you guys have questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. I will bring you the mic, and it's probably something that we will all want to know, something that other people have questions about too. So don't hesitate to ask. All right, before we get started, does anybody need anything, have any questions before we begin? Okay, Becky, I was like, what? Stop. Becky, I should have introduced you. I'm sorry. That's Becky Walsh in the back. If you will wave at everybody. Becky is the Central Region. Me, she's the auditor, field staff / lots of things. Ruthie Britt is the us for Western Kentucky. She will be here this afternoon leading the attendance clerk training. So those of you that are staying will get to see Ruthie this afternoon. So hopefully today you will, as this says, learn what to expect and how to prepare. If you feel better at the end of this, that's the goal, especially if you have an audit this year. So how many of you do have an audit this upcoming school year, 26-27, if you'd raise your hands? Awesome. Okay, you're exactly who needs to be here, so that's perfect. So this is our district support team. You met Rhonda, she spoke to you first. Laura Lohman, lots of you guys probably talked with her just about a month ago as you were submitting your SAR. She also does Growth Factor. And Sam Engstrom does FRAM, and she deals with SSID issues. And then, as I said before, Ruth, Becky, and myself are your field staff. So what we're going to talk about mostly are these next few items. We're going to talk about the purpose of attendance reviews. Megan, this isn't switching. And I think, did she just leave me? She's like, okay, bye. Hope you had fun, Sasha. You know, we'll just do it. That's fine. Button in the corner. Okay, so we are going to talk about why we do these attendance reviews. And I'm just going to be completely frank. They're called attendance reviews. They're audits. It's kind of like how we have to use all the good euphemisms with our students and make things sound not as they are. But an attendance review is an audit. So when you hear that term, that's what that means. So the purpose of doing them, we're going to talk about those. We'll talk about an overview of the logistics of the process so that you'll know exactly what your audit year should look like. We'll talk about the details of the review itself or the audit itself. That's going to be kind of really the most important part of the whole presentation is going over that form. We're going to go basically line by line so that you all know exactly what we're looking for. We do not want an audit to be a surprise to you. You have heads up that we're coming. You have the exact form we're going to use. You know what reports we're going to run. You know which schools we're going to audit. Nothing nothing is a surprise at all. So take some comfort right away in knowing that. We're also going to show you a few documents, pages of documents to support you in getting ready for your audit and keeping your data clean. And then we'll, at the end, have everybody's contact information. So the reason we review, there are a few of them. First and foremost, I will say, just as kind of an anecdote, when I taught 8th grade English. And I'm a little too disconnected now to know if it's still the same. But at the time, 8th grade English was the most heavily tested area in K-12. Right when I left, they had just also tacked on the language usage portion, plus on demand, plus reading, plus I don't even remember. And so when all of these things would come down to us, I was the queen of like, oh, KDE, like, why don't they know this testing? Like, that was me. But, so I got here and I was like, I'm going to go to KDE and I'm going to make some changes, right? Exactly the same attitude I went into teaching with. And then when I got here, I realized that everything that we do here is because of the legislature. So there's nothing that we do in our office at KDE that is not because of a law or a statute or a regulation that is in place. And unfortunately, working here does not give me the power to do anything about that. So, so I say all of that to say that's one of the main reasons why we do this, because all of the stuff that we audit, as you will see on that form, is tied to a law, a statute, or a regulation. First and foremost, and this is a little more personal, our office kind of takes a different approach. Yes, we have the backbone of having to follow the legal standards of what we're looking at, but most importantly, and I think those of you that have been through an audit can attest to this, we really are trying to make sure that all Kentucky students are receiving the instructional time that they are legally entitled to, so that kids aren't coming to school and, sitting in lunch for an hour and then, I don't know, sitting somewhere else for 2 hours. We have to make sure that they are getting the instructional time that they are legally entitled to. Also, we want to make sure that you all are getting all the funding that you're eligible for. And I think, again, if you have been through an audit, we are not looking for errors just because we take great joy in writing you up. We are looking for errors to help you correct them so that you can make sure you are getting all of the funding to which you're entitled and ultimately that your students are entitled to. Okay, is that better? All right. If you guys can't hear me, just tell me. Gotcha. Forgot we're recording. Okay. And then finally, it is also to help you guys because especially most of you are DPPs, I think, or clerks, and probably those of you that are DPPs wear multiple hats at central office. So you know how important it is to keep all of the data related to basically everything attendance touches, to keep that clean because it impacts so many grants and points of funding, both at the state level and the federal level. So we take the approach as an office of making sure that we do all of those things, that we help you in all of those ways. So this is me telling you that I'm going to suggest that you should also do an attendance audit every year. So we only come to you every 5 years. That is a lot of time for a lot of stuff to go very wrong and for a lot of funding to be lost. So we advocate that you take this training and you take the form, which we update every year, and that you use those tools to audit yourself in-house. That way, the expectations always remain the same. when you have turnover of staff, what they are expected to do is very clear. And there's no question that when your 5-year rotation comes up again, your audit is going to be spectacular. Okay, working again now. So what we're going to talk about now really quickly is just an overview of what the year should look like if you are getting an audit. So I can't speak for Ruthie, but I know that Becky and I have already contacted the districts that we're going to audit. I'm sure Ruthie has as well. So bullet point 1 should have already happened. So you know at this point whether or not you're getting an audit. If at the end of this training your district has not been contacted, so you're not getting an audit this year, you're welcome to ask me or ask Becky when your district's audit is coming up. We have that schedule, I think, out through like 2035. Yeah. So feel free to ask if you're not sure and it's not coming up this year. A little bit later, probably later this month or early in September, whoever your field staff is, myself, Becky, or Ruthie, will contact you and set a tentative date to actually visit your district. Now, that date has to be after the second school month has been closed. So after it's done, essentially after you have turned in your growth factor is the best time. Some of my districts start really early, so I wind up beginning my audits usually at the end of September, but early October is kind of the prime time for audits to start because we're looking at the end of that second school month, so the first 40 days of instruction. There we go. Okay. So once you get that date set, you and your field staff have agreed on the date, you will be getting an email. I send mine 2 weeks before. I think Ruthie and Becky do the same, but you can ask them. And when I say that we are using that to remind you and confirm the date, that is very true. Those are 2 things that we do. But that email is one that you are going to want to look out for and that you are going to want to save, because in that email, we provide you with a bulleted list of every single thing that you will need to have prepared. Okay, so we don't just arrive at central office and say, okay, I need you to pull this, this, and this. I need your clerks to pull this, this, and this. You have 2 weeks to prep and get those materials ready. So that will also be in that email. If you are getting audited after you get your date set, please be on the lookout for that. And if it's 2 weeks until your audit is going to happen and you haven't gotten that email, reach out to us to make sure that we haven't forgotten to send it or something. So it's important. We also at that time let you know that we're going to be in your Infinite campus pulling reports. So you guys know that when you are running reports, it'll see like last ran by whoever on this date. I think now it shows our names, but before it would just show this like unknown user or system admin, and it looked very ominous and weird. So we always let you know that that's us in your Infinite campus digging around. And that usually also happens about 2 weeks before your audit, sometimes a week before, depending on how behind we are on getting our reports ran. And then hopefully your field staff will visit your district on that date unless something comes up. That's another thing. If something major is going down and you didn't remember when you first scheduled that date, please feel free to reach out to us. None of us are scary people. I don't think. So if something comes up and you need to reschedule, just let us know, and that should not be a problem. So what will happen is that when we arrive at your district, we set up at the central office. Now, how many of you were audited before Becky, Ruthie, and myself came on board? Okay, so a handful of you. Good. You can back me up on this. You know that unless you were in Western Kentucky where Sheila Harned was, she didn't do this, but our other two auditors in Central and Eastern Kentucky, they really loved going to the schools and telling the clerks at the school on that day, I need this, 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 and this, and having them pull it right then. When I shadowed the Central Kentucky person when I first took this job and I saw that happen, like it stressed me out. And I was just observing because the poor clerk was not just the attendance clerk. She was also, the only person watching the front desk. She was the secretary. She was answering the phones. She was letting people in and out of the building. Their kids running in, throwing up. People need to talk to this person and that person. And I was just like, I would probably have a stroke if I were in this person's position and had to, somebody from KDE standing over me saying, I need to see 2 months worth of this report and that report, and I need to see these documents. It stresses me out even thinking about it. So what we decided to do as a team was adopt the model of the lady that was in Western Kentucky, where she had the clerks from the schools come to the central office and meet her. We felt that made a lot of sense and was a lot less stressful for everyone. So what will happen is those schools that are being audited, and we'll talk about which ones those are a little bit later, but we will have those clerks bring all of their documentation, which DPPs, please make sure when you get that email with the list that you share that information with your clerks. So they will bring all of that documentation that we let them know they needed to have ready to central office and meet with us there. We'll get to talk to them one-on-one and go over everything together. No clerk and no DPP will leave that day wondering how they did. Like, oh, I don't know what this report's going to look like. We go over it all together. That way, you can let us know things that we need to know. If a day was particularly crazy and that just happened to be the day that we asked you to pull your check-in, check-out, and it was like grandparents' lunch day and it was awful, we need to know that. Now, will we still have to write you up? Yes, but it's not going to be something where we're like, this clerk does not know how to sign people in and out of their building. So that way we can actually have conversations with people and understand a little better what's going on. So likely, unless you are a huge district or unless something is really a mess, your almost said your clerk, your field staff should only be in your district for 1 to 2 days. If you're an average size district with like 1 high school, 1 middle school, 3 or 4 elementary schools, it's usually able to be done in 1 day. 1 and 2 is all likelihood that's what's most common. If it's more than that, you're probably a bigger district, or maybe you've just got a lot of stuff to clean up. So after we are in your district for however long it takes to actually do the audit, meet with all your clerks, and meet with you, if you are a DPP, we also have to spend some time with you. What we do is we take all of that data that we've collected, we go home and we write what's called the initial report. And so that's where we take the audit form and we turn everything that we found as a discrepancy, which is, an error. You'll see that term a lot too. We'll take everything that we found as a discrepancy and write it up in a report and send that to the DPP. So basically, it's like, these are all the things that I found that were incorrect. Please fix them. And that's all it is. The initial report is kind of like your formative grade, right? You get the audit, you get the report back, and you get a chance to fix it. Then you can immediately begin correcting those. We do send out a document with that called Making Corrections After an Attendance Audit, and it walks you through literally, if you got a discrepancy on line 4.2, these are the things that you can do to show you've corrected that discrepancy and send that back to us. So nothing is left up to chance. Nothing is a guessing game. Nothing is a surprise. So you can go ahead and begin correcting those right away. Clerks, wait for the go ahead from your DPP on that. They may want to correct things themselves. They may want to have all of you like go through it together and correct everything together as a group, as sort of like a PLC. So don't start, automatically correcting everything right away. Get with your DPP and find out how they want you to handle that. And then after you guys get that initial report, we will set up with the DPP a time in the spring to go over everything. Now, that being said, let's say that I audit Mark tomorrow, okay? By Friday, I have that report back to him, and he immediately on Monday starts getting his clerks to get stuff fixed. And let's say 2 weeks from now, he has all of that documentation back to me. We don't have to wait until the spring to talk and be like, okay, you're done. You're good. This was awesome. Your audit is over. That can happen on a rolling basis. There is a deadline by which we have to have that done, and that is in April. So typically early spring is when we will follow up. But if you are the kind of person that likes to just get stuff done and over with and you don't want to leave it sitting, you can do that. You can begin immediately and we can kind of get it done on a rolling basis. Typically, I do my follow-ups virtually unless things are kind of crazy and I need to go back in person because I want to look at stuff together and make sure that things are corrected. Again, I can't speak for Ruthie and Becky every time, but I believe they do things the same way, that it's typically virtually unless there's a reason why. And sometimes the districts want us to come back, and that's fine too. Okay, we're getting ready to get into the big portion of actually looking at the form. So before we do, are there any questions so far? Okay. Hot mess. Hot mess. Put that on the recording. Okay. So we're going to go through the form together, line by line. Again, before we get started on this part, are there any questions about the process or anything like that? Okay. All right. So if you have the document, we're going to go through each bit of it. If you don't, you can pull it up online. If you're not sure how to get there, let me know. And Rhonda or Ruthie can come, or Rhonda or Becky can come walk you through how to get there. All right. So just to break the actual form down, there are two sections. Okay, there's the central office section, and you will find that on pages 3 through 11 of that document. That is where, just like it says, we are auditing central office stuff. It's not school level review. That will come a little bit later. This is where we're spending time with the DPP looking at stuff at the central office level. That's pages 3 through 11. We only do that once per audit. I've never seen a district with more than one central office. God help us if that exists, but it's only done once per audit. The school level review, that's pages 12 through 30. And we do that section of the form. So those pages are copied and done for every school that we audit. Okay. So again, pages 3 through 11 for the central office, we do that once. Pages 12 through 30, that's the school level stuff. And we do those pages for every school that we audit. Does that make sense? All right. Now, The schools that we audit are all your high schools, all your middle schools, and half of your elementary schools. And the way that we determine half of your elementary schools is we look at the elementary schools that were audited 5 years ago, and then we do the other ones. So it may not be an exact half, especially if you have 3 elementary schools. We can't audit 1.5 of them. So Becky, I hope you heard my math and are proud of me. Thank you, thank you. She and Ruthie like to pick on me because I taught English and they're both math people. So that's right. That is right. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, half the elementary schools, all the middle schools, all the high schools. However, if you are a new DPP or if you have a lot of turnover, or if you feel like 5 years has just been a really long time and you want all of your elementary schools audited, that is something that you can request. It may not be something that may be able to be done during the formal audit season, but I do informal, what we call soft audits all the time for districts that are like, Sasha, can you come in and just like give me an idea of what's going on? I'm happy to do that. So if you want all of your elementary schools audited, just let your field staff know. Okay, we're going to go over the central office section now. This is page 3. So all of the page numbers on the slideshow should correlate with the actual page numbers of the document, not necessarily of the printout, but of the actual document itself. So I have no idea what the printout even looks like at this point. I feel like it's been through 14 iterations this morning, so we'll do what we can. So you're going to see up here at the top the big yellow stripe and the big blue arrow pointing to the big yellow stripe. That is to make sure that your attention is called to this because, as I said earlier, everything that we audit is tied to a statute or a regulation. And so this tells you what they are. So if you are ever curious about why are they looking at this, look at the audit form and it will tell you these items are audited because of these laws, because of these regulations. Now, the first thing that we look at, actually, these are kind of all just for us, the auditors themselves, but starting with line 4 is where you can catch some discrepancies if there are problems. So the first 3 lines are just for us for planning. We look at your first month and your second month, and we write down the beginning and ending of those dates. That's to make sure that we don't show up when you're like halfway through month 2 and you don't have full data to give us. So that's just making sure that we have done our due diligence of showing up when we're supposed to. The second thing is what I already told you was going to happen kind of at that 2-week mark where we contact you and say, hey, we are the person scrounging around in your Infinite campus. It's not a hacker and everything is fine. Thirdly, we have to take a look at the last time that you were audited. Hopefully not much longer than 7 years ago. That's the cycle that we're on because of COVID. The people that are getting audited this year have not been audited for 7 years prior. So we will have to look at your last audit and see if there were any areas of concern for that auditor. So we look at their report and see if there was something that they noticed that particularly stuck out as a problem or what seemed like a systemic issue that we hope would be addressed by now. But basically, we're just looking to see if there's something that we need to pay special attention to in your district going in. Now, line 4, and we'll go over really quickly exactly how this document is set up. So you can see there are 2 main columns, the line items and then the description of what that line item is. That's important for you to know because those line items also correlate with your report that you will get that shows your discrepancies. And it also correlates with that document that we will send to help you correct them. So you need to kind of know how the document works and how it's set up. It's very simple. Line items over on the left side under the heading that says line items. And then the description of the line item is under description. So we did not make it too difficult, I hope. All right. So line 4, we are looking at attendance codes. And these are all of the state exempt codes. So all of these are pushed down from us at KDE into your Infinite Campus for you to use. Okay. So when I look at these, you're going to see like bullet point number 1 there, it says 4H equals other present exempt. So we are looking not only to see if you have the code, but that it is mapped correctly. Okay. So 4H should be other, present, and exempt. We're going to be looking at all of that to make sure that mapping is correct. And we do that for each one of these codes. Okay. I'll give you a second to look over them. I'm not going to read through them, but those are the codes that we look at, and we look at the mapping to make sure it's done properly. If you are in Infinite Campus right now in your district, if you're on your device, we have under each line, you can see in parentheses in bold, it gives you the path on Infinite Campus to take you straight to what we will pull up to look at this. So in this particular case, you can just go to tool search and search attendance codes setup. That's going to be probably something that you all are familiar with anyway, but you can search that and it will take you straight to what we're going to be looking at. Okay. And you're going to see that with every line. We tell you exactly how to get to what we are going to pull. So again, nothing is a surprise. Any questions about any of that, about exempt codes? Hold on one second, Mark. I'm going to
just clarification. So every year, you know, with the Armed Force Day and the Armed Force Rest and Recuperation, I know it only applies to mom and dad or guardian. Is there any change with that? Because we get requests all the time about, well, it's my brother, my sister. Still just mom, dad, or guardian? Okay.
So for the recording, the answer to that is yes. Again, that is that's something that we have a hard time with too, because we see the way that districts kind of struggle with the fact that, they have family members that are deploying or coming home, and that doesn't count for them. So this will be count number 1 if anybody wants to use it later for a drinking game of me saying, contact your representatives if you would like to see something different. Any other questions? All right. That line item 4 is continued on the next page with 3 more codes. We have the only one that's not actually an exempt code is that suspension code, but we do have to check that also. And then you can see we have a slot there for unauthorized exempt codes. That is where we will check for exempt codes that you all have created, because in case you weren't aware, exempt codes function just like a present code. You guys get paid for those. The student is considered there for all intents and purposes when you use an exempt code. And that's whether or not it is present exempt or absent exempt. If it's exempt, you still get paid. So we monitor those really closely with the district level created exempt codes, because people kind of post-COVID Wild West got really exempt code happy, and exempt codes are like, we've got exempt codes for everything floating around out there. So As we do your audits, we check those. And any unauthorized exempt codes, you will probably have to delete, or if they are actually something that you have discovered is very necessary for your district, there is a process of getting those authorized. And that's simply sharing that information with me, and I will share it with our team, and we'll kind of talk about whether or not we see any potential issues with that code not being used properly, or if it's causing more work for the clerks. That's typically what happens. If it's causing more work for the clerks than it's really worth, then we will probably not authorize that. And I'll give you an example of that. We have several districts that really like to use an exempt code to track skipping. And we do not recommend that. If we notice it, we do not allow it, and I'll tell you why. Number one is that skipping class, like if the student is physically in the building, right? They have their first period taken, so we know they're there. They just didn't show up to second period. So what should happen is the teacher should just mark them absent in second period, right? And then that yellow A is going to trigger the clerk to be like, that kid was here, what's going on? Or ideally, as a classroom teacher, and those of you that have taught, Christina, tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm too far removed, like have become one of those people that are out of touch. But ideally, what should happen is the classroom teacher should be like, this kid was here in second period. Where are they now? Nobody's let me know that they are in the counselor's office or here or here. So you call the clerk and be like, did this kid go home? Sometimes that's the case, right? They just went home and the clerk hasn't updated that yet. Sometimes it's not the case and they are not where they're supposed to be. But that should be triggered by that teacher marking them absent. Okay. When you put in that yellow skipping code, what you're doing is, yes, you're tracking data for behavior, which I get, but you're also making your clerk ultimately check that kid out. And then when you find out where they are or what they've been doing, then they're getting checked back in. And that's 3 additional steps where a lot of data can get messed up relating to their attendance. So that's an example, a very common, real example of why we go through these exempt codes and make sure that any that you all have created are authorized. Any questions about that, about exempt codes, either state ones or created ones? Okay. All right, so line number 5. And again, I want to draw your attention to, in parentheses in bold, you can see exactly where to find this in Infinite Campus. We're looking at your behavior resolution types, and all we are looking for are just these main 3 that are required by the state. So we have SSP1, SSP2, and SSP3. So we do look and make sure that those are also put in correctly, but it's kind of hard to mess those up. We don't look at any of your other behavior resolution codes. We're just looking to make sure that you have those. Another thing that I want to draw your attention to is this 4th bullet point. Whenever you see that, or you see the phrase KDE recommends, that's not something that's required. That's not something that you will get a discrepancy for if you don't do it. It's just saying we have noticed over time that this makes things easier, or this is a best practice. So for this one, we do recommend setting up SSP1 as an exempt code, because we found that that just helps across the board, both with behavior and attendance tracking, if they are expelled but receiving services, to track that as an attendance code. Number 6, this one is one that I always love to have people run in training if you have access to it and are on your devices. But we look at your all tool rights. Okay, so you go to you tool search ad hoc, and then state published, and it's under all tool rights. And that gives you a list of everyone in your district who currently has all tool rights to your Infinite Campus. We require, it says we recommend, I'm going to use stronger language, we require that you have 5 or fewer people. And I say that because all tool rights is a scary level of Infinite Campus access. Like, you could shut an entire district down for a long time accidentally with all tool rights. It is not something that you want to give out willy-nilly because you don't want to spend the time to go in and click on the actual individual rights that people need for their job. It's important that you do, because all tool rights is a scary level of access. So, and I say that with full confidence that it is able to be done, because we audit Jefferson County and Fayette County every year, and they both operate with 5 people having all tool rights. Now, I will not speak to the, you know, I'm gonna let that go. I'm gonna let that one go. I'm being recorded. So they run off of 5 people, okay, on all tool rights. So check that, and usually you will find there are a lot of people who maybe no longer work in the district or have retired, or, you know, somebody got lazy that day and didn't feel like clicking all the buttons, and your food service director has all tool rights when they really don't need access to that. You'll find some crazy stuff if you've never looked at it before. Go through that and make sure that it is pared down, and that's what we look at too. Now, if we get there, and I will never say never, because districts operate so differently. If we get to your district and you have 6 people, and for whatever reason you have found some kind of crazy instance where this person absolutely needs all tool rights and so do the other 5 people, we'll talk about it. But as a basic rule, 5 people or less. Any questions about that? Or about any of this? All right. Okay, so this one we are getting into some math, which is not my favorite, but it is what it is. So this first one, we are looking at your ADM ADA report for school months 1 and 2. And as we continue through the form, it becomes really clear why we cannot visit your district before month 2 is over and closed. But we run that report together. So we click month 1 and month 2, so it all pulls together. The ADM ADA report in funding mode. And then we also run your R2 on the growth factor for school months 1 and 2. Okay. Again, the paths are there. They're on each one. And what we do is we compare those 2 reports and confirm that those totals match. And it tells you underneath exactly, scared me. I forgot there was a walking trail back there. A guy just went by the window and I was like, okay. Whew. Okay, so we compare these things that are bulleted down here. Okay, so the funding attendance column on the ADM ADA report, that number, we compare that number with the district base aggregate days present total on the growth factor. Okay, so we look at those 2 numbers and they should match. And you can see over here, it's a very simple, yes, they do, no, they don't. If they don't, that means there is data incorrect somewhere. It's usually a very quick look to figure out which school the data is incorrect at, and then you can go from there to get it fixed. In line item 1.9 on the very bottom, we then compare that current record 2, that R2 on the growth factor, with last year's R2. So we're looking at last year's data from this same point in the school year compared to this year's data. And we're doing that to look for either really large gains or really large losses, because both are worth investigating. Large losses are typically due to incorrect data input somewhere, and that's easily fixable. Large gains, if you have those, we're probably going to want you to do what I'm doing right now and present to everybody and tell them how you did it. Okay, so if we see a difference in either direction of a gain or a loss that's 15% or larger, we have to report that to Rhonda, and she and Laura are going to investigate it and figure out what has caused it, and help your district either get closer to the correct number if you've had a huge loss, or again, probably take you on a state tour if you've had a 15% gain. The next thing that we look at, we are on page 7 here, line item 1.10. We're going to make sure that you have copies of all of your school's master schedules at the board office. So you will need to just hand us copies of all the master schedules of your schools. And what we are going to do is compare those start and end times of each school with the board minutes that approved the start and end times. Then we also compare the current year's calendar with the board minutes where that calendar was approved and make sure that those match. Now, there are times when that will not happen. Clearly, especially my people in Eastern Kentucky know that by September, October, like the calendar could already be different for whatever reason. So that's okay. That's okay. Because that's what amended calendars are for at the end of the year. But if your board approved a traditional calendar and you guys are operating on a variable calendar and there's no documentation as to why that is happening, that's going to be a problem, and we're going to need to know that. Also, if you have an attendance-based virtual program, an A8 in your district, this is where we will look at some of that information as well. Okay, page 8, we are taking a look at non-resident students. And really all that we use this for now is to take a look at out-of-state students and make sure that they are set up properly and that all of their data is correct in Infinite Campus. This used to impact funding, which I'm sure some of you all are aware. Before House Bill 563, which everybody refers to as the Open Borders Bill, where kids can just kind of go wherever they want, this used to impact district funding when you would have non-resident students, but it does not any longer. However, the LRE, the legislature, still needs this data, still wants this data. And so we have to provide that to them. And that's one of the reasons that we check it and make sure that it's clean. So that first line, line 2.11, again, you can see the path to the 2 reports that we use. And we are looking for all non-resident students that live out of state. And that report will pull that up. And then in line 2.12, we look at 2 things. If kids pull on that report, we're looking to make sure that in their enrollment tab, you have it reflected that that student lives out of state, and then also that you have put them into an out-of-state attendance group, okay? And then line 2.13, this one is one that people generally after this training do have to go back and do some cleanup. And it's not anything that will be detrimental to you. It's just information that does not need to be there. So this is one where we look at children of district employees. And you always I think for a long time, people would put any kid that was a district employee's child under this flag, even if they lived in the district. And that's not what it's for. This flag is for teachers who bring their children with them into the district because they work there. So, for example, when I taught in Bath County, that's also where we live. And so my kids should not have been flagged CDE because I wasn't bringing them in with me. They would have gone to school there anyway. That is for kids that are brought in by out of district employees. That makes sense? Okay. Also, you can only flag the kids that live in Kentucky. So those of you that are border counties that have people that live out of state that come into your district to work, if they bring their kids with them, those kids cannot be marked CDE because they are not residents of Kentucky. Any questions about that? All right. Okay, this one's always fun. Coffee first. So this is where we look at home hospital. We do have some updates here. So if you have been through this training before or you have been audited relatively recently within the last couple years, you will be aware of this. Hopefully you're all aware of it because it's a big deal. But we do have some new legislation for home hospital for inpatient facilities, which we will get to. But the first thing we're going to do, line 2.14, if you follow these lines sequentially, it takes you through exactly what we do, each step that we follow. So the first thing we do is we pull that ad hoc for students that are on home hospital, and we just get a list of all of your kids that have been put on home hospital in the last 2 months or the first 2 months of your school year. Then we will have, hopefully you'll have those applications pulled already because we will have let you know what we need, and we can look and make sure that line 2.15 is done, which is that you have a parent or legal guardian signature on the application. Line 2.16, next we look for that signed statement from a doctor or a medical professional and make sure that all the dates match and all of that looks good. I think by now, most everybody is familiar with the medical professionals and mental health professionals that are legally able to sign these. If you're not, there are links there that will take you to the list of people that are able to sign those applications. And then also the third little section down under line 2.16, there's a caveat for students with disabilities. So in that case, the ARC for our students who are special ed and have IEPs, the ARC, if the home hospital placement is related to their disability, they will place them on home hospital. And in that case, we don't look for a doctor's signature. Your district, your dose may require that. That may be something that they want, but we don't look for that. If the ARC places them, then all we do is look at that IEP. Line 2.17, for students who are placed by the committee, we are looking to make sure that there are 3 signatures on that application. So the 3 required signatures of the Home Hospital Review Committee must be on that application for it to be valid. It's typically the DPP, a home hospital teacher, and then some other professional within your board office that makes sense. It's usually like the district health professional, bless you, or bless you, the district nurse, somebody is usually the 3rd signature. And then line 2.18, we look at the date of enrollment into the home hospital program. And there are 2 bullet points here. The first one is that for regular ed students, we're looking to make sure that they start on or after that recommended start date. And the recommended start date is filled out by the doctor. Okay. On that form, there is a portion for the doctor to give a recommended start date. That's what we're talking about here. So they should be enrolled either on that day or after. For students with an IEP, that's going to be the date that the ARC recommends when they meet. Any questions so far? Yes. Oh, hold on, Teresa.
Okay, this is just to clarify. You said back to the 3 signatures. So there's 4 people listed. So 3 out of the 4, it can be any of those. Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Hey, my answer to her was yes. Indeed. All right.
So Sasha, like it's not uncommon for the doctor to put a date, like 3 or 4 weeks prior to me getting the home hospital application. Obviously, I'm not going to put that date that the physician put 3 or 4 weeks ago when we haven't been providing any services, correct? Okay. And so, and then when the ARC decides they're going to place a kid on home hospital, you know, I don't always get that information like immediately. So, you know, they may have met on a Wednesday, but it could be Monday before I get the conference summary, that section 4 form. So again, I guess the question is, there's going to be a discrepancy on when in the IEP of when they said that the home hospital is going to start versus when I get the information and assign the home hospital teacher to service the kid. So is it okay for there to be a couple of days difference between the IEP and when they actually start home hospital?
Yes, but with some caveats and clarifications. So for regular ed students, the point that you made is a good one. So like, let's say that you've had a kid that's been out forever and the doctor is finally like, okay, we're going to do home hospital, and they backdate that application to like the first day of their absence or within the first little bit of their absence. Because you have not been providing services, you do not enroll the kid in home hospital on that date. Okay, that is precisely why we say on or after, because sometimes that's like a week before and the 5 days would already be up and they would have had no services for that 5 days or however long. So you have to, like, there are guidelines obviously, but there's also like, just, you have to, like, common sense also has to come into play, you know? That's why we say on or after. However, if, like, let's say for instance, a kid is very sick and you have been in communication with the family, maybe even with the doctor's office, and they've been out for a week, you have no paperwork yet, but you knew that the paperwork was coming, that the kid was going to be on home hospital, you could absolutely go ahead and begin services. And then when you got the form, you could use that date then. If they did not put that date on there, then you could just admin excuse those days and just keep rolling with servicing the kid. That's really the main priority, is doing what's best for them. For the kids with an IEP, that's also a very good question and happens a lot, where the ARC recommends a date and you guys don't get the paperwork until it's already eaten into those 5 service days. You can only do what you know. And so, again, they should be enrolled on the day that the ARC recommends, just because that's the legality of the thing. However, They can also be admin excused in home hospital. Okay. If you didn't know that they were supposed to be serviced, there was nothing that you could do about that. So, like you said, let's say they have the recommended start date for a Wednesday. You don't get the paperwork till Friday. Okay, that's already, if they did it the day of the ARC, that's eaten into 3 days of that 5 service days. And so what I would do if I were a DPP in that situation would be to admin excuse those 3 days and then try to get them serviced Monday, Tuesday. Or if you have to admin excuse that whole week, that's just what you have to do. What, Rhonda? Okay, hold on one second.
You might be able to, if you got them serviced for within that 5 days, like Monday, Tuesday, let's say it started Wednesday, then you could go back and that would count for the 5, and then you can start. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I do. Because I feel like we're just talking semantics here. You know, an excused absence is an excused absence as far as funding concerned. So I don't really understand the point. If I don't know the kid's been approved for home hospital until 4 or 5 days later, why do I need to go in and excuse why do I need to put them in that home hospital attendance code and go ahead and excuse those absences when it would be excused regardless if they were in a home hospital attendance group? So we're really an absence is an absence, and I don't understand the point of putting them on home hospital until I have the proper documentation. And my proper documentation is those things I just talked to you about. I know what the ARC's done, but an absence is an absence, so I don't really understand the purpose behind putting them in a home hospital group, backdating it, so to speak. I'd prefer not to do that, but I don't want a discrepancy.
Okay, so no, that's a good point. But I will say this, just from like a logic standpoint, in your example, right? You the kid was placed on Wednesday. Let's say you don't even get the information until the next Tuesday, right? You're saying that you don't want to put them in the home hospital group until you have the documentation. At that point, you would have the documentation, right? And so, right, you would start setting up their services on Tuesday. But if the ARC put them in on Wednesday, then their enrollment date would be Wednesday. And that is because we do not mess with IDEA and we do not mess with federal law. And I'm sorry you don't like it. Sorry, buddy. Sorry, homie. It is what it is. All right. So the next thing, well, we're not at the next thing. Any more questions?
Just a quick question. You were saying, like in that example, when that happens in our district, and I just want to make sure, because this was, of course, people have changed jobs. So I just want to make sure, instead of doing an admin code to excuse those days, if there's been like we've not been able to service, but maybe ARC placed them, we have done that as a doctor excuse because they're under a doctor. Okay, just want to make sure, because that's what we've done instead of admin. Okay, thank you.
That's a good point. Let me say in the mic what I said back to Teresa. Absolutely, you can do that. It can be a doctor's excuse if you have that date on the form, for sure. I just said admin because that's at your disposal. But 100% you could do a doctor's excuse for that. All right. The next thing we look at, line 2.19, we make sure that those home hospital students are being served the amount of time that they are legally required to be served. So they have to be served at least 2 times for 5 student days, so that period of 5 student days, they have to be seen at least twice for 60 minutes each time. So does that mean if I'm a home hospital teacher and I'm very stressed out and very busy and I find a free afternoon and I haven't been able to get to this family and I can finally go see them, that I could just do 120 minutes and be done? Can I do that? Absolutely not. No, it has to be 2 one-hour visits. Okay. Now, that being said, I'm going to put in a plug for the fact that I'm going to be doing a session. Mark, I'm going to bar you at the door. I'm doing a session on home hospital specifically at the KYDPP conference. So we will dig into, I can see he's already formulating. He's like, aha. So much questions. Yeah. Oh, I know. So we will go over all of this stuff in depth and a little more intensely than here. This is just the overview for the audit. But we do look to make sure that they are being serviced the amount of time that they're supposed to be. And then also that second bullet point there, we look to make sure that they have been enrolled for a minimum of 6 days. However, that's the part that has changed. Okay. Yes. Let me. No, I'm getting my steps in.
We had a question because sometimes the doctors will either put a vague date like fall of 2026, or they won't put a start date, or they'll put an end date that says to be determined. What is the, sometimes we'll start services. Do we need to go back and be specific on the date, or do we just do the date we get that, or what is your guidance on that?
Okay, so for that, then your start date is going to be the date that all of the home hospital review committee signs that application. So the date that all of the signatures are had on the application, that means that's the day it was approved. So that's the day that they will be enrolled. As far as an end date, if they put to be determined, there are 2 possible avenues there. Number 1, on the application, there is a spot for the doctor to mark if it is a chronic condition from which the student is not likely to recover within a year. If that's the case, then it would be reviewed the next year. If it's not the case, if they don't indicate that it's chronic, then it would have to be renewed in 6 months anyway. So there are guardrails for vagueness of the end dates. Like 6 school months. Okay. Yeah, she asked if you count the summer months, and no, it's school months. All right. The next thing that we're going to discuss is that second bullet point that says they have to be enrolled a minimum of 6 days. That is what is different. Okay. And we will cover this again in depth at that session at KYDPP. We're also going to be releasing a home hospital guidance document that again will cover that a little more clearly. And I think that's in the process of being approved with our legal office right now, and then we'll get it out to you. But last year, maybe 2 years ago, it was approved through the legislature to give kind of a second option for home hospital enrollment times for students who are put into crisis centers or inpatient facilities. So we were seeing a lot of students that were being hospitalized in these really mental health crisis facilities on like 48-hour holds, 72-hour holds, and the districts in which those facilities were located had dedicated teachers in those facilities. And so the kids were getting services, but the district was not able to be paid for those because most of the patients were not there for less than 6 days, or they were there for less than 6 days. So that has been something that's been added, is if your student has been put into an inpatient facility or they're in a crisis hold in any kind of inpatient facility, that home hospital services can begin immediately and they can begin to get paid for immediately. That is not a super common case for districts that house those facilities. It's only, a handful across the state. But if you think that you may have a situation where that's the case, for example, I represent Eastern Kentucky, and so a lot of our people who have mental health crises get put into just rural hospitals on the psychiatric floor for 72 hours. So if you are having situations like that, then please talk to me. We'll work it out together and figure out exactly how you need to code that. But if your district does house an inpatient facility, or if you have a student that has gone to one of those, they are now able to be marked as home hospital as long as they are having those services provided there. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. And then finally, for the actual audit portion, comparing data, we look at your teacher's home hospital forms. So the actual form where they keep track of the days that they go visit these kids. We are looking at those forms that they turn into you and comparing them with what is in Infinite Campus to make sure that all of that is being documented correctly. Because if a teacher cannot see a child for whatever reason, then that needs to be documented in Infinite Campus. So typically we see, people like those home hospital codes are just in there for the duration of their time on home hospital, even if the teacher program forms don't match. And if a student has missed a visit, then they need to be marked absent in Infinite Campus. So that's what we're checking for here. Okay, any questions about that? All right. Okay, we are now on page 11. Rhonda, did you want to say anything about this, the at-risk counts for SEEK? It's circled. I didn't know if there were announcements about that. Okay. Becky, she's not in here. Okay. I didn't know if she had something special. All right. The last thing that we check at the board office level is whether or not you have a policy for enrolling underage students. Most districts just use the KSBA policy and adopt that as their own, and that's completely fine. We just look to make sure that you have one. All right, and that is it for central office. Not too painful, hopefully. Okay, with that, before we head into the school section, I'm going to take some questions and then we're going to take a little break for 10 minutes. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. We are starting on page 12 with the school section. So for my clerks in the training, this is going to be your section that is all the stuff we're going to look at your individual school. Before we start this section, did anybody think of any questions or have anything about the central office stuff? All right. So this section of the form is set up exactly like the central office section. You're going to see those line items over on the left-hand side under the column that says line items. And then the description still is under the column that says description. So up at the top, though, we do have to put in some new information. We have to do the school name, the district name, the name of your principal, your name, if you're a clerk. And like I said before, we do these pages, so pages 12 through 30 for each school that we audit. The first thing we will ask you is whether or not your DPP has either trained you this year for your job or provided training for you for your job. And usually these meetings are one-on-one with us and the clerk. And so you can you can be honest and say, no, they haven't, or yes, they have. And please keep in mind if your DPP gave you the opportunity to go to training and you just couldn't or didn't, then the answer to that would still be yes, because they did provide you the opportunity to do it. The second thing we will check is the bane of every middle and high school clerk's existence, which is Classroom Monitor. So what we will do, your eyes are like, oh, yes. What we will do is choose 4 random days before we get there. That is the one piece of information that we will not tell you. Okay, we're going to choose 4 random days before we get there and pull Classroom Monitor for those 4 days within the first 2 months only. And we're going to take a look and see what it looks like. So if there's a lot of not complete attendance, we're going to look at that. And that's going to be a problem. Now, I want to show all of you something if I can get the computer to work properly. Is Melissa in here with me before I do something wild? Okay, we'll just see what happens. Okay, I think Melissa is listening to me on Teams. Melissa, please be prepared to help me. What did I do? You know what? We're not going to do that. So if you go to your Classroom Monitor, okay, those of you that are on a device, if you go to your Classroom Monitor and choose a day, you can do this for last year so that you can actually see what I'm talking about. There's going to be a little hyperlink at the top, where you actually see like the green or the red for who's taken attendance or who hasn't taken attendance. Up at the top, there's a little hyperlink with a little printer icon next to it. And it says incomplete teacher attendance report. Okay, if you click on that, it makes a list for you of every teacher who has not taken attendance that day. Okay, that's what we pull. Like we will go to your Classroom Monitor and we look at it, but then we also hit that incomplete teacher attendance report button and it gives you a list of every teacher who has not taken attendance that day. And so we will have that list and we will show that to you and say, okay, on September 4th, these 5 teachers did not take attendance for these periods. Was something going on? Did they have a sub and you just forgot to put in the paper attendance? Like what's happening? For you clerks, that is a very useful tool, not only to see at a glance who you need to harass, but also to keep documentation. Okay? Particularly for teachers for whom this is a persistent issue. Now, I say that as the world's absolute worst when I was teaching, okay? Not because I was, trying to be hateful or subordinate or difficult. I would forget because I had, 30 giant smelly 8th graders that I was trying to wrangle into their seats and make them care about writing and grammar and reading. And I would just forget. And so my clerk would call and say, Sasha. And I knew as soon as I saw her name, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'll post. If you have a teacher who does not say, oh, I'm sorry, I'll post, but I'm busy, or that's not my problem, or that's your job, or something if you have a teacher that is difficult and this is a persistent issue, save those reports, okay? Because at some point you're going to need your principal to back you up with the fact that this teacher is not following and not honoring a very important part of their contract, which impacts school safety, okay? So All of that being said, that is a very handy report for clerks. That's also what we will pull to look at those 4 days and see if we have any teachers who have not taken attendance. Okay. Then we're going to pull the schedule gap report. This will show us any students who don't have complete schedules. Now, again, this is where conversation is crucial because you could have a kid that will show up on your schedule gap report and they are actually a student who isn't in enrollment, meaning they are there just for special ed services, and they're going to pull on the schedule gap report, and that's okay. The schedule gap report is not one that necessarily has to be cleared. It just has to be cleared of students that should have a full schedule and do not. Okay? Any questions about that? All right. The next thing we will do is take a look at like the actual physical sheet for your entry exit log. If you use an electronic entry exit log, we will need to see, you know, what the parents or guardians fill out when they come to pick that student up, because we are looking for the following required information. We have to see a date. We have to see the student name, their time of arrival or departure, their grade or homeroom, and then a parent or guardian signature for elementary school sign outs. Okay, I'm going to say that again. A parent or guardian signature for elementary school sign outs. Now, we audit the bare minimum of what the law requires. Okay, the law requires that there be a signature when an elementary school student is signed out and taken out of a building, and for good reason, right? However, your district may require more. Okay, your district may require much more than that. And so we are checking for this bare minimum, but you'll want to check your board policy and make sure that your entry exit log is requiring all of the information that your board policy requires. Does that make sense? Okay. So we will want to see for all of your elementary schools, every time a student is signed out on that entry exit log, we're going to be expecting a signature to be there. If your district requires more, we won't be auditing that, but you can. In line 4.27, all we will do is ask you if you have those entry exit logs from the year prior still housed at your school at this time. Records retention says you have to keep those in your building for a year. So we're just going to say, hey, do you have these for last year? And normally when I do that, the clerks are like, because they think they were supposed to bring them. No, just make sure you have them in the building, and that's all we require. The next part is honestly where Becky can correct me if I'm wrong. I would say 70% of our discrepancies come from, and that is the entry exit log. So what we will do, those 4 days that we are not going to tell you about, which again, that's the only like surprise part of the audit, is that we choose 4 days again from within the first 2 months of school, and we run this check-in, check-out ad hoc. And we ask that morning when we arrive, we'll tell the DPP, okay, please call the first clerk, tell them to come on in, and they need to bring copies of their entry exit log for these 4 days. That's when you find out, is that morning. And so we will take your copies of the actual sign in, sign out sheet and compare it with that ad hoc. Okay, typically what I do is I will have you read your sign in, sign out sheet to me, and I will compare it with what's in Infinite Campus. And we have to go line by line. It is 100% the most tedious part of the audit. You have to tell me the student name, the time, whether they signed in or out, and I have to check and make sure that that all matches in Infinite Campus. Okay. And I tell you all of that detail to say it is crucial that that data gets put in correctly. Okay. If it is even a minute off, it's a discrepancy because ultimately, I mean, we can talk about funding, and I'm not going to say that's not important, but you guys know, especially those of you that are parents, we need to know where those kids are and that they are where they are supposed to be at the time they are supposed to be there. And so discrepancies of that kind are very, very important to get a handle on and get cleaned up and make sure that you're not continuing to do those. And so we go through them line by line, and even 1 minute off is a discrepancy. And we do that over 4 days. Okay. So 4 days worth of check-in, check-outs. For high schools, that's a nightmare. for, for middle schools, it's less of a nightmare, but still a nightmare. Elementary schools, we usually breeze right through unless you're a giant elementary school. So please make sure DPPs stress to your clerks the importance of putting that data in correctly at the end of each day, of checking those data points at the end of each day and making sure that that's all correct. And clerks, please make sure that, I know you have a bazillion other things pulling for your attention, but that, knowing where the kids are and the time that they're supposed to be there or not be there, is really the most important thing that you do. Okay? Teresa has a question.
Okay, this is not on here, so I just want to clarify. At one point, it said, or we were in a training that said that these checkout and checkout logs had to be confidential, like you couldn't see the person above. Or is that still true? Because let me tell you why. When you're saying this has got to be accurate, a lot of our schools have tried to switch to that where they can't see, it's blacked out except underneath, and then that creates problems for us because sometimes you can't read it. So that there's some of the issues that we're trying to work through. But if it still needs to be that way, then all of our schools are doing something. But if that's not so much, because I didn't, if not, we need to know that, because it would be much better just for them to write it. We could see better.
Okay, that's a very good question. And unfortunately, that is an area that I don't have an answer for. I think that is probably something that's implemented by the Center for School Safety. And if that is the case, that's something that they have not communicated to us. So all that we know is what is legally required for the entry-exit. And for the accuracy of the entry-exit log. That is something, check with your school safety coordinator and see if that is still in place, or if there are any different parameters for that. And if they don't have an answer, I'm sure the Kentucky Center for School Safety will, because that sounds like a school safety implemented policy. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So that portion that usually takes up the largest part of the audit when we're looking at the school specifically, is going through those 4 days of entry-exit logs. After that, we're going to look at the school bell schedule. And when I say the bell schedule, I mean the one that you actually have posted in your school, or the one that you put in the student handbook, the one that you give to parents on open house. You provide that to us, and we check that against what's in Infinite Campus. Okay. Now for elementary schools, all that we're going to check is that your start and end times are the same, because elementary schools usually do not operate on period schedules, and it's not that big of a deal. Okay. We just need to see that those elementary start and end times on your bell schedule and what's in Infinite Campus are the same. Middle and high school, it's a very different ballgame. Okay. So for middle and high school, your bell schedules have to match what is in Infinite Campus, except your bell schedules can have your passing time. Okay. So in Infinite Campus, you are expected to have your periods back to back. You don't put that passing time in because passing time of 5 minutes or less counts as instructional time. Okay. So if I have first period beginning at 8 a.m., it lasts until 9. I'm going to put in Infinite Campus in that period setup that second period starts at 9 a.m., even if it actually starts at 9:05, because you give the kids 5 minutes to pass. Does that make sense? Okay. So we expect your bell schedules to match Infinite Campus with the exception of that passing time. And that's for middle and high. Now, that being said, in line 5.32, we are looking at that first bullet point there, and that's exactly what I was just talking about. We're looking to make sure that you don't have any gaps between your periods in Infinite Campus. Why would we care about that? So for example, if you just wanted to have everything represented accurately, first period starts at 8 a.m., ends at 9 a.m., second period starts at 9:05 a.m. So you're like, I'm going to make sure that everything is done correctly, and this is going to be put in Infinite Campus the way we do it. And so you put second period starting at 9:05. And then I arrive and I'm like, that's not right. Why do we care? Why would I tell you to correct it? Yeah, instructional time, which equals what? Yes, funding. Okay. So I thought you said money. Oh, sure. Sure. I heard what I wanted to hear. Okay. Yeah. So if you have those 5 minutes between each period represented in Infinite Campus, at the end of the day, you're going to be below 360 minutes of instructional time. And that's not accurate, right? That's not accurate. And it also will cause a big problem with your funding. So that's one of the ways in which we check and make sure that you all are getting all the funding for which you are eligible. Another thing is putting in too much passing time for lunch. So we check all those things not to be nitpicky, but because we know, well, one, we have to check it, but also because we know that is where so many schools lose funding. You lose instructional time, and it's a very simple fix. Okay. There you go.
What is your suggestion on sometimes the middle school especially will have different bell schedules for different grades, different times, but is there a good suggestion on how to handle that?
Okay. So like different period setups for different grade levels. Is that what you're saying? Okay. I mean, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so Esther clarified that she meant like if grade levels stagger their release times because of having too many kids in the hallway. And as an 8th grade teacher, I completely get that because you did not want them in the hallway with 6th graders ever, ever, ever. So 100%, again, that is where being able to have one-on-one conversations versus just like making people pull data and look at it is important. Because ultimately, like if your 8th graders released at 9 and then your 7th graders released at 9:02 and it's staggered that way, ultimately everybody is still only getting 5 minutes of passing time. It's just staggered. And that's fine. So as long as you can make sure that your clerk can explain that, or that like you explain it in the follow-up to your auditor, That's completely fine. That's a good question. Any other questions? Okay. So we also check, we're still on line 5.32. We check to make sure that passing time is included in the lunch period and that anything beyond 5 minutes of passing time becomes non-instructional minutes. So if for some reason, well, I have seen in the mornings, like schools will do maybe a grab and go breakfast after first period. And so they give a longer passing time between, let's say you give 7 minutes instead of 5. Out next to second period, you would just put 2 minutes in the non-instructional time because 5 minutes of that you're allowed. That's just an example, okay? The next thing we look at, line 5.33, is determining how many instructional minutes you have in the day. There are parameters for this. You cannot go over 420 minutes and you cannot go under 360, okay? So we check to make sure, we look at the period setup and the calendar summary, and we verify that those instructional minutes are between 360 and 420. And then 5.34 is where we start looking at the calendar, and we have 2 avenues. Of course, we have the traditional calendar. And if you have a traditional calendar, we check 2 points of data. We look at that calendar summary, and you have to have both at least 170 instructional days or student days, and then 1,062 instructional hours. We also, it's not on here, but I also just courtesy check your school days, which are your staff days, the days that teachers and staff report, but students don't necessarily have to. I check those to make sure you have 185 just as a courtesy, and I will let you know if you don't, because that's important. Then for variable calendars, you have the data point of just the 1,062 hours, with the caveat of having to start on or after the 3rd Monday in August. Okay, and I will pull that same report, the calendar summary, to make sure that you have everything that you need to have in there. Then the final thing I check in this area is your calendar in Infinite Campus versus the calendar that the board approved. So again, that could have changed between, you know, your best laid plans in March of the year before and what actually happened within the first 2 months of school, and that's okay. But ultimately, it should match unless you have a reason that it doesn't. Any questions about any of that? Okay, so this is just a quick look at the 2 points of data that I look at to determine your instructional minutes, to check your period setup, all of those kinds of things. So the one on the left, you have the path at the top. You just go to tool search and search period setup. That's what I'm looking at there. These are the periods in which there should be no gaps. Okay, like I was talking about earlier. And then over here on the right is the calendar summary. You can see that's a very quick look at the number of instructional days, the number of school days, the instructional minutes for each school day. You can see that each type of period schedule name is represented on here. So if you do have multiple period schedules, you can see this data for all of them in one place. Okay, any questions about any of this? Okay, the next thing we look at are virtual and performance-based courses. So we run first the ad hoc for virtual-based courses. This is a very surface level audit that we do on these types of courses. Okay, so for these, what we are looking at, we're looking at the traditional virtual courses. Think like when I was in high school, which is 27 million years ago. It was actually just 26 years ago, but that was a long time. Think about that, where you would have like college classes and you would all go in a classroom and like watch the teacher on, you know, the giant TV who was being broadcast in from from a college. Those types of virtual courses, or you actually go off campus, right, to a college and take courses. That's what we're talking about here. So the first thing that we do is run that ad hoc, and you can see on the ad hoc itself, if you run it right now, it's going to pull up and have a column over on the left, and that column is going to be full of zeros and ones, or zeros and ones. 0 means that course is not marked for attendance. Ones mean it is. Okay? You do not want virtual courses marked for attendance. And I'm talking about traditional virtual courses. We're not getting into all the A8s and the not today, partner, not today. So these are just traditional virtual courses. Okay, they should not be marked for attendance. We also have to determine whether or not that course is actually taken off campus. So if it is a course that kids from the high school go to at a college, the clerk should be able to say, yeah, that's off campus. If your clerks are not sure what these courses are, please talk with them before your audit, okay? Because they are going to have to be in the hot seat essentially to explain all of this to us. And really, if they're, again, in charge of these kids, knowing where they are or where they are not, they should at least have some idea. Now, if you are a large district and your school has a ton of these courses, and you know you're sitting here looking at me like, okay, Sasha, I will tell my clerk how this works, and she will 100% remember and communicate it correctly, fully sarcastically, right? If that's what you're thinking right now, then you make sure that you are able to communicate that to your auditor at some point in the follow-up. Be like, look, this is why this looks this way. This is what these kids are doing. It requires a conversation, okay? So we are looking, again, 2 things to make sure that it is off campus and that it is not marked for attendance. Anybody in the back want to add anything to that, Rhonda, Laura? Okay. Okay, so on page 18, it's the exact same process, but this time we're doing it for performance-based courses, and it's a little bit different, okay? So we're going to pull that ad hoc. It's set up exactly the same way. You're going to have that column on the left-hand side, which at a glance will tell you if these courses are marked for attendance or not. What are the courses marked for attendance going to have next to them? A 1. Very good. And the course is not marked for attendance? We'll have a 0. Awesome. So we're going to look at that first and see what's going on. Okay. Line 6.40, we do check to see that it is not marked for attendance. However, if it is, then we will have a conversation with you about that. Now, somebody that has been through this process or just really knows their stuff and is willing to talk into the microphone, raise your hand and tell me, please, when you can mark a performance-based course for attendance.
In our high school, we have some of our courses, like our elective courses, marked for performance-based attendance because they meet the instructional criteria in a shorter amount of time than the year-long course. So those are performance-based courses. Well, because they are there taking attendance, and they're not going to get, it's not a, because Jesse Carlton gave us approval on by email It's why I know I can do it, but but that's why. And I've saved the email just in case.
Okay, Jesse Carlton told her to. That is good enough for me. Okay. Mark, you know why? Okay.
An example of where you might mark it for attendance. So let's say that one of your teachers is duly certified by that university, and the kids are enrolled in that college-based class. They're getting college credit and high school credit at the same time, and the kids are there and they're taking attendance, every 5 days a week during that time period. You could, if you wanted to, set it up as an attendance-based course. I'd recommend you not, and follow the normal pass-fail model.
So yeah, he hit the nail on the head. So the criteria for marking a performance-based course for attendance is that the kids are there in the building and that they are under the supervision, not necessarily the instruction, but the supervision of a certified teacher. Okay. A lot of times this will look like maybe a credit recovery and kids are working on Edgenuity, but they are in the library, right? And the librarian is a certified teacher and can mark that that kid is there. That is a performance-based course because that kid could finish English 4 in 2 weeks, right? And then move on to something else. They would get credit for that. But they are physically there. That teacher can take attendance for them for that period. I saw some hands.
Okay, so I work at an alternative school, DJJ facility, and it's all Edmentum. Like we have a few, so I don't need to. We take attendance once a day. Is that okay? Like we just take it in the morning. When that. It ain't. Okay, because that's where I get confused because like you have a bunch of Edmentum classes, but you don't know when they're going to be doing them. Does that make sense? Like especially with my high schoolers.
So in that situation, you honestly could, because here is how, and you DPPs correct me because I like 70% don't know what I'm talking about, but so how these courses are typically set up is when you have performance-based classes like that, like this, you're going to have the period set up and it's going to say like placeholder 1 or credit recovery 1. Okay. And you can take attendance for that kid within that period in Infinite Campus. That's called credit recovery 1. But they could be doing any class on Edmentum, right? Yes. Yeah. You know what? Don't worry about it. Don't you worry about it. Don't even worry about it. Yeah. No, you're fine.
I think our question is similar because we have marked our credit recovery classes at our high school. We've marked them virtual because they're doing a virtual platform. Does it make a difference if it's virtual or performance as far as? Okay, we can swap that.
So my answer to her when she said if there's a difference between those, only if you want to mark them for attendance. Okay. So the class, yeah, they are on Edgenuity, Edmentum. It could be marked virtual, but if you do mark it virtual, you do not have the option of taking seat time attendance every day. If you mark it performance based, then you do, but only if they are there in the building and under the supervision of a certified teacher. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. That's why I said we'll talk later. Don't even worry about it. Don't worry about it. Okay. Another thing that we will check is making sure that you have a board policy for performance-based courses. And again, just like the underage students, typically most districts have just adopted that blanket KSBA policy, and that's completely fine. Just make sure that's available for us to see. And then finally, you're going to see another recommendation down here, and this is for DPPs mostly. We're going to recommend that you run that funding gap audit report to make sure that your students that are listed there are getting full funding. Okay, so you're looking for a number of 93 or higher. That number means that those kids are getting full funding. If you have a student or multiple students who are not at that 93 or higher on the funding gap audit report, that means those kids are not getting full funding and you need to take a look at their schedules. Okay. Now, we don't audit that, but we do highly recommend that you use it. Any more questions before we move on from virtual or performance-based where auditing is concerned? Okay, I know there are bazillion questions where virtual is concerned. All right, so the next thing that we do is pull your attendance register report. Those are the reports that your clerk should be running every month, that your principals are supposed to sign and that your clerks are supposed to balance. Okay, and we're going to talk about what balancing looks like in just a second. So we pull the first 2 months of the register report and the first 2 months of the ADM ADA report, and we check to make sure those match, whether they balance, and we check to make sure that those are signed by certified school personnel. Again, that is typically a principal. It can be somebody at central office, but it does not need to be. Clerks that are in here, please raise your hand. I put you on the spot, but you'll be fine. It's fine. Raise your hand if you know what I mean when I say that you have to balance those reports. Fabulous. Okay. It's a process that you have to do every month, but really it's almost like kind of getting a monthly physical on the funding health of your school, okay? Because if those numbers don't balance, something is wrong somewhere. And that's when you have to kind of start digging to figure out what it is. So what we have to do is use those two reports and match these numbers. Now, Ruthie is going to be covering this in depth this afternoon. I'm not going to go into it fully in depth, but this is what I will be checking on those reports. This is what your clerk should be checking, these data points, to make sure they match. If your principal is signing off on them, they are signing off that this data is good. Okay, please make sure that everybody knows that, because I think sometimes people just sign what's put down in front of them. Ruthie also has updated this monthly attendance reports document, and we'll be sharing that with you as well if you're staying this afternoon. If you're not, that will be available online, and you'll be able to train your clerks if you so choose using that document. Okay, the next thing that we look at is your IEP students that are marked T5. Okay, so we pull this ad hoc that shows us all T5 students. So T5 is an attendance code for students who have an IEP and have a service of special transportation in their IEP. Okay, that's required. So that's what we do with this portion of the audit. We get that list of kids on the ad hoc, and then we go look at their IEPs and make sure that they have transportation as a service in their IEP. If they don't, they cannot be marked T5. Okay, so I'll say that again a different way. A student that has an IEP is not automatically a T5. Okay, just because they're in special ed, that does not mean that they can be marked a T5. They can only be marked a T5 if they have transportation as a service in their IEP. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, now, some questions that I always get that I do want to clarify, just in case somebody wants to ask and isn't sure and doesn't want to talk in the microphone. If they have a 504, they cannot be a T5. Okay, can they ride the special transportation bus? 100%, but they cannot be funded as a T5. Okay, if you have a student who has an IEP and has transportation as a service and rides that bus that has siblings that also need to ride that bus with them, those siblings can ride that bus with them, but they cannot be marked a T5. Okay? Rhonda? Okay. Okay. Yeah, forget that. Forget I said that. Scratch it from the record. Yeah. Okay. So reverse. Only students with an IEP that have transportation as a service can be marked T5, period. That is all. Okay. I now no longer know. I don't know. Okay, Mark says they can. So. Imagine. That makes sense. It makes sense. Okay. So I don't have an answer for you any longer where that is concerned, but we will get one. However, Mark says it's fine. So do with that what you will. Okay. On page 21, the next thing that we look at, this is still all regarding transportation. We run the ADM ADA report in detail so that we can see all of your students and all of not only their enrollment and or withdrawal codes, but also their T codes. And so what we will ask you to do at this point is to provide us a sample of some of your transportation forms for each grade level, and we will check those forms against what is in Infinite Campus. So for example, if your form states that a student is a T3, but in Infinite Campus you have them as a T1, obviously that's going to be a discrepancy. So it's important to keep that data clean. If you have electronic transportation forms, you will need to make sure that your clerk that comes to meet with us has a device with them that is able to access those and pull those up. If they will not be able to have that, then you will need to make sure that you provide that as a DPP. Okay, so however you collect transportation information from families, you need to make sure that that information is available to your auditor to check against what is in Infinite Campus. So if you use OLR, if you have your own transportation forms, if you use like some third-party vendor stuff, we still have to be able to see how you're collecting that information and be able to look at individual kids. So just make sure that we have access to that. So We will check a portion of your student population, each grade level, against the data that you collect for transportation and what they have in Infinite Campus and make sure that that all matches. The second thing we will do, we will audit the overlapping T codes. We'll look at that report, pull that ad hoc and see if you have any overlapping T codes. This is pretty common if you don't clear out the previous year's T codes. If you don't indate those, you're going to see open-ended T codes from years going back if your district hasn't done that. You can also see that if you have students that go to, like, let's say you have a middle school kid that takes a bus up to the high school to take an Algebra 1 class. If the high school has put in a transportation code for that kid, they're going to have an overlapping T code. In those situations, only the primary enrollment gets the T code. Okay, so if you have a secondary enrollment somewhere, there won't be a T code there. The next thing we will look at, we're on line 8.48, is your missing T code report. That's huge. You don't want missing T codes. So that will pull any kid that does not have an active T code and just give you a list of them. This is one that clerks, if you're not running this regularly as part of like your monthly cleanup, I would recommend running all of these every month at least. The first 2 months of school, I'd probably run them every week because so much changes if you have time. So missing T codes, again, does just what it says. And if there are any kids on that list, of course, that would be a discrepancy. And then in line 8.49, we pull the audit in-dated T code report. And any kids that are on there, of course, that would also be a discrepancy. There are several different things that could cause a kid to pull on that report, but typically it is students that keep coming in and out of enrollment, and those enrollment dates aren't matching the T code dates. So you need to check on that. And then finally, where this is concerned, where transportation is concerned, we will check to make sure that you are verifying those T codes twice a year. This typically happens at the beginning of school when kids are registering or enrolling, and then again after Christmas break. Any questions? All right.
All right. I thought I was loud enough. Okay, so the audit missing T codes, if they have a partial secondary enrollment, will that pull? Okay, so that'd be an example of where it's okay to have a missing T code? Okay. Can you put NT, or does that, NT's okay to use? Okay.
Hold on, Esther. There you go.
So when you all come, will we know the names? Because the way we do T codes is we do a Google form initially, like now we're collecting that information on a Google form, but then throughout the year, we don't keep updating the Google form. The parents send in notes. So I'm wondering, like, when you all come, will we know the names of the kids you're going to ask for the T codes? Okay. So like, how do they, like, if they're not in their office, how do they just bring all their notes for T codes, or how do we do that?
Okay, so you're asking if like the transfer, if the clerk is not in their office? Yeah. So if if parents have brought in notes, yeah, I think, and that would be fine. I mean, I would recommend making sure there's an across the board way to document that. Yeah. All right. And then, I mean, of course, if you're getting audited and that continues to be a concern, you could talk to Becky. Maybe she'll be nicer than me. I don't know.
Okay, you said you wanted the routes. Okay, my question is when we bring it in, oh, I thought you said decode some routes because you were going to match to make sure that it's a T3 and not a T1. No. Okay. Because sometimes the bus driver, okay, like if our bus goes to the high school to drop off students, that's less than a mile, but that's the last stop. So the kids are on the bus for 30 minutes before they get to, so we don't put in the less than a mile. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah. Nope. No, ma'am. Gosh, if we had to check routes, I'd be there for 2 weeks. No, we just check that. So however you collect your transportation data, meaning that the parents or guardians fill out that paperwork saying this is where we live, this is how often our kids ride the bus or don't ride the bus, that information. We check that. So we need access to that against what was put in Infinite Campus and make sure that those T codes match. Now, am I going to know that, I don't know, Salt Lake Road is 7 miles? No. And am I going to check it? No, I will not. But I will check to see if the T code that's associated with that kid based on that paperwork matches the T code that's in Infinite Campus. That being said, that actually reminded me of something important. On your transportation forms, one recommendation that I always make to my districts when I audit them, if they don't have it already, on however you collect transportation data, please do whoever has to handle that data a favor and put a spot on that box, on that form somewhere that says for office use only, and then give the option of choosing T1, T2, T3, T4, T5. That way we know at a glance, looking at that form, okay, somebody has already ran this address through Google Maps and we know this kid is a T2. Okay, because if you have to do that every time that you are cleaning up T codes or looking at T codes, that's a lot of legwork that's not necessary when it's already done once at the beginning of the year. So make sure there's some way to document what T code a student is on the way that you gather the information. Does that make sense? Okay, and that's not a requirement, it's just a recommendation. Okay. Any more questions about that? Okay. Esther, with your question, I think I would, at least in the short term, recommend when those notes come in, I'm hoping that they're putting them in the student folder, right? I'm sure they are. I would recommend, like you said, also documenting that in the contact log in Infinite Campus. So that way, I mean, you don't ever want somebody's sole way of saying where a kid is supposed to be. I got a note from a parent that I can't produce for you. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Do you mean daily? Like daily notes? Yeah, I mean, that's different. We're talking about stuff that would impact changing a kid's T code. That makes sense? Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, it has to be documented. If it's well, that's fine. You just need to document that you received a note and that's why the change is being made. Yep. All right. The next thing that we look at are going to be your all of your students who have withdrawn within the first 2 months. So we will pull all of those kids. It's every withdrawal code. So the whole gamut. We look at all of them from the first 2 months. All of your students that are marked as a W-22, you don't need to give us any information for them because we can see those records requests and all of that information in Infinite Campus. The ones that we do need to see from you are your W-24s and your W-29s and whatever the code is for homeschool, W-20. Is that right? Okay. I completely blanked for a second. So we'll need to see your homeschool letters for any kids that are W-20. We'll need to see your W-24s. Those are your students that are whereabouts unknown. Is that right? Okay. I've completely blanked on my withdrawal codes. W-24s, that withdrawal code gets tricky because, I mean, obviously you don't know where the kids are, or you wouldn't give them that code. However, when we audit and we see that code pop up on a kid and we're looking through your documentation and that kid is not there anywhere, that's a problem. Okay, so if you have a kid that you genuinely don't know where you are, where you are, I don't know where I am, I guess. You genuinely don't know where they are, then we need to see documentation that you have done your due diligence to try and find them. So we're going to want to see things like contact logs. We're going to want to see things like any notes that have been put into Infinite Campus about, the Frisky coordinator went out to do a home visit today and no one was home. DPP attempted to do a home visit on this date. Nobody was there, spoke to a neighbor. They don't know where they went. We need to see that attempts have been made to find this kid, and that's all that you can do. We know that nobody has the ability to, full-time bounty hunter these kids down, but we do need to see that you have tried to find them, because that's why we're doing what we do, right? We don't want kids unaccounted for. So that's what we need to see for that. When you have a student in your first 2 months, because hopefully you all will pull those reports yourselves before we get there and say, okay, we've got 2 W-24s. What have we done to try to find these kids? Pull that documentation, and that's what we need to see. Okay. W-29s, if they have moved out of state, then we're going to need to see any documentation that you have about that. If it's a fax from a school out of state requesting records, if it's documentation of a phone call, emails, if grandma told you that they moved to Texas, we need to know what you know and why you have given them that code and any documentation associated with that. Okay.
Does this mean like in the contacts completed a note, or do you need like a hard copy of each encounter for a reason that somebody has moved to a different school?
Not to a different school, just out of the district. Yeah. No, it doesn't have to be a hard copy of anything. It can be notes in Infinite Campus. Yeah, like contact log, anything of that nature. We just need to see, every district is going to keep documentation in different ways. We just need to see documentation that attempts have been made to find the kid.
Okay, if we have the W-24 and we put on there like in the PLP that we have tried to make contact and they have moved out of country. We don't know that for sure, but a neighbor has said that. So should we keep it a W-24 or a W-29? My other question with that, later on, they never come back to our district and they never go anywhere. Is that going to cause a dropout on us on our district. So how are we going to get dinged for that then? Either way.
I understand. Yeah. No, there's nothing that can be done about that. Unfortunately, it is what it is with the nature of, I used to think it was just my district, but I think that's because that's the only context I had. Education has become very transient. And so I think that's just, unfortunately, a side effect of that we can't really do anything about. Any other questions about that? Okay.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, because we used to do that and then I was told we didn't have to, so now I'm confused. A student that like is a W-24 or we've gotten information that they've moved out of state, like we've done a home visit and grandma called, we've documented all that in Infinite Campus, that they've moved to Texas, but we've not received a records request. We can't get a hold of mom, but grandma said that and the neighbor said that. So we didn't used to, but then we were told, yeah, you can withdraw them out of state because you've got it documented of how you knew. So that's what we've been doing. So if I need to go back, because what I was told were, and I actually have it documented, is, okay.
You're fine. Don't panic. It's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, and that actually, Teresa asking that actually brings up a good point. So, one of the things that I keep reiterating throughout this whole presentation is the importance of conversation and your clerks and also your DPPs being able to explain to us when we come into audit what is happening, right? Having some kind of good picture about what's going on. Now, let me say this for context, okay? As I said, all of this stuff is being audited based on the law, right? Statutes and regulations. Those statutes and regulations then have to get interpreted by people here who are like, okay, the laws say this, that means this for us, and that means this for the districts. However, you are also going to get people who take those guidance documents and regulations and also interpret them in their own ways. And so is it possible that you will get two different answers from two different people at KDE? Yeah, 10,000%. Okay. Is it possible that you will get two different answers from two different people within the same office at KDE? 85,000%. Okay. What needs to happen when that happens? Okay. For you, I can't speak for like what goes on in special ed. I can't speak for what goes on in behavior. I can't speak for what goes on regarding all of this. Okay. When that happens, if you get an answer from somebody in our office or anybody anywhere related to any of this, and it differs from what I'm telling you today, do not hesitate to email me later and be like, Sasha, I was told this, and here are the receipts, and who is correct, and what am I supposed to do? Okay, because that means that there's a conversation that needs to be had between our whole team. Okay, and figuring out why people are telling people one thing and other people are telling people another thing based off the same documentation. Okay, and that's just being real. Like that happens no matter where you are. And if you are seeing anything on here and you know, well, I was told by insert name of anyone here that we don't have to do that because we have this going on. Okay. Just tell me. Okay, and that way we can talk about it, because there may be something I don't know, there may be something they don't know, there may be something you don't know. Maybe none of us know anything. Okay, so just communicate, and we will get it figured out. Okay, if you are being told different things, then the problem is us and on our side, and we need to get it figured out. Okay. All right. So the next thing that we look at is your suspension. So we will pull an ad hoc that tells us all of your students that have been suspended within that first 2 months of school. And then we will ask you to please bring the letters or the slips or whatever it is that gets sent home to parents and guardians when you have kids that get suspended. Okay, because it is required that they be given written notice. So we check to make sure, number one, that there's written notice, and then we check to make sure that those dates match, that the dates that are on that written notice match their suspension dates in Infinite Campus. And then as a courtesy, we don't write you up for this. That's why it says KDE recommendation only. On line 10.55, we run the Safe Schools report, and that tells us if there is any difference between your attendance data and your behavior data. It will kick back as an error, and we will give that to the clerk on the day that we audit and say, hey, I ran the Safe Schools report. This is what pulled up. Typically, that's done because the behavior in time or resolution time is not matching the attendance time, okay? And DPPs and clerks, please know that that attendance time always trumps the behavior time. And so if there's a difference, whoever inputs that behavior data needs to go back and fix that time to match the attendance time. Okay? Any questions about any of that? But again, that's not a discrepancy for us. That's just something we run as a courtesy to you. Okay, we are on page 24, and it starts rolling pretty quickly from here. This is all kind of basic stuff until we get to partial day, partial week. So we look next at your students that have taken EHO days within the first 2 months of school. And then we just ask that you bring those EHO forms with you so that we can look at a sample of them and make sure that all those dates are matching. And also that your principal signed those forms before they went. Okay, so those are the two things that we audit. We audit that the dates match. So the dates on the form match the dates of the EHO code in Infinite Campus, and that the principal signed their approval before they went on wherever they were going. Okay, we do not audit why they went. We do not care. So that's not on us. Okay, that's on you guys. But we do audit those 2 points of data. Any questions about that?
So we had a kiddo that the parent went ahead and put more days than what they actually went. Are we able to cross those days out and like initial and date them if they did go ahead and attend school those days? So that way. Okay. Yeah. And then do we need to have the principal, like I had the principal re-sign it, or don't need the principal, just the attendance clerk can go ahead and say they did attend those days? Okay. Thanks.
The code in Infinite Campus is changed to present from EHO. Any other questions? Okay. So the next thing that we look at, we're on page 25, and this is line 11.58. We are pulling the AFD code. So these are any students that have been given the AFD code. This is not a very common code anymore. I've seen maybe 3 of them the entire time I've done this job. This is a code for students who have a parent, a legal guardian, or a custodial parent who is being deployed for the military, and they get a day to go be with them for their deployment or for their return from deployment. Okay, so the AF, if you want to take any notes on this, 2 things. Okay, it has to be a parent, a legal guardian, or a custodial parent. And they can have up to 2 days for this. Okay, 1 for deployment and 1 for return. Now, the documentation that you can accept for this, it can be a note from the parent. It can be documentation from the military. That's typically not done just for the 1-day deployments or returns. Typically, that's just going to be a note from the parent saying, hey, my kid's not going to be there because, you know, my wife is deploying on this day or whatever. And then we have AFR, which are the same circumstances, but a little more involved. So that stands for Armed Forces Rest and Recuperation. This is for students who have a parent, guardian, or custodial parent who is at home on leave from being deployed. Okay, so they get 10 days or up to 10 days for this to spend time with that parent while they are home on leave. And typically you will find the few cases of this I have seen, the military does like provide a document, not necessarily for the school, but just saying, you know, this officer or this person, this military personnel is home on leave for these dates. And typically they will turn that into the school so that you can see, but you can also just accept a parent note for that as well. So they do get up to 10 days for that. Again, those are no longer super common, but they do exist. Page 27, we look at partial day students, and we've had a little bit of change, and it's probably like a loosening of the strings, which is always welcome, that we'll talk about in just a second. But we look at all of your students that are marked partial day, and remember, partial day is an attendance group. Okay, so partial day is an attendance group. So the way that we pull those kids in that ad hoc they are part of that attendance group. And we also ask that your clerks bring with them their own list of kids that are allowed to attend for less than full time. The ideal situation is that their list and that ad hoc are going to match. Does that always happen? No, which is why we audit. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is comparing that student, like them being on the partial day attendance group or being in that attendance group with what is in their IEP. And this is where I said things have loosened up a little just because we've had conversations and gotten more information. So one thing that we do have to see, and these are non-negotiable, so for kids to be on partial day and have that full funding box checked, okay, which means they are funded like they're there full time, they have to have it in the IEP that they are going to be on a partial school day. I think special ed typically calls it shortened day or shortened week. It's the same thing. Okay. So that has to be in their IEP. And it also has to be approved by your local board. Now, clearly, that's going to be done in an anonymous fashion so that these students' medical or whatever information isn't blasted all over board minutes. That's easily done. Okay. But we will just need to see the board minutes where that was approved, and we'll take a look at their IEPs and make sure that it says they are receiving shortened day or partial day, however they word it. Now, where things have loosened up a little is previously we had to audit that the exact schedule that these kids would follow was in the IEP, and that it had to be in the least restrictive environment section. That is no longer the case. Okay, so we are not auditing for where it is in the IEP, and we are not auditing for a schedule. All we are going to be looking at is whether or not they have a shortened day or partial day in the IEP and whether or not the board approved that.
So do we need to have our board approve those before? Because typically our board will approve them like in January or December, and then at the end of the year, do they need to be approved before you all audit? Okay.
Yeah, I would recommend, I would recommend approving those as they, as they come up. I wouldn't hold on to those for semesters just because, that you want that board approval for documentation of allowing a kid to not follow compulsory attendance laws. Any other questions?
All right, Sasha, could you clarify? So when we have a kid on a partial day, we're setting up that attendance group and we're putting in a specific time frame of when the kid comes into school and when the kid leaves. So how is that different than this fluidity of the schedule that you're talking about? Doesn't sound like it is.
Okay. It is not. Here's the thing. It is language, right? So I didn't say that shouldn't be present. I did say we won't be auditing for it because by IDEA laws, our office cannot require them to put that specific information in the IEP. Okay, meaning I can't audit for that. Whatever you and your DOS work out as what's best for your districts, like that's between the two of you. It's kind of the same thing as the parent signature on the elementary school sign-outs. That's a baseline legal requirement that I audit for. Most districts require more than that. Same principle. Like if you have gotten used to having that data in that spot in the IEP and having a full schedule and you and your DOS are good with that, that's fine. We just can no longer require it and we won't be auditing for it. Does that make sense? I know you don't like it, but does it make sense?
All right, so walk me through what is this going to look like? So you come to Boone County, you pull our list of approved partial day kids, you look at that attendance group, and that's all you. And as long as somewhere in the IEP it says they're on a partial day, you're good. And board minutes, but you don't. So that in and out time you don't care about anymore. So like because a lot of times these partial day kids they'll change it in the IEP. Like they'll start out with let's say 2 hours, and then a month down the road they then okay now we're going to move to 3 or 4 hours. So I don't have to worry about changing that attendance group then, correct? Well, we get back to semantics. I've checked that full funding box, so I'm getting full funding regardless if I change it or not.
So what you're asking me is should you do the right thing and record your data accurately because I won't be auditing it? And I think that's a question for you and your conscience, Mark, not for me.
My question was kind of the same thing that I guess he's getting at, but some of these parents, they do ABA, I guess, and their schedules are, 2 days a week, but say ABA calls and cancels, they just show up to school on the day they're supposed to be at ABA. What do we do? I mean, do we allow them to come to school on the day that our attendance says that they're not supposed to be there? And do we take attendance on that day? I mean, we've got to show that they're in the building. So, I mean, how do we handle that? Do we say, no, you're not supposed to be here? Go away.
Don't do that. No, don't do that. Well, that's a good question. So, in any instance, especially when you have kids that are not regularly in the building, coming in the building, when those partial day kids show up, you need to have a sign-in sheet for them anyway. That should be happening regardless. So 100% make them sign that. Now, whether or not you can allow them to be there and how to track attendance for that, you guys know as well as I do that anytime an attendance group kind of floods that attendance record with that code, you can go change those, right? So if you had a partial day student who showed up for a day and everybody was fine with that, the principal was fine with it, parents wanted them to be there, all you would have to do is go change that day to present, right? Does that make sense? And then make sure that they signed in. As far as whether or not you have to allow them to be there, I certainly wouldn't turn a kid away, but that's going to be between the family, the kid, the dose, the ARC, the principal, lots of people that are above my head, right? Any other questions? No, that's new too. I will get to that. Don't worry.
So we have a partial day student that comes in, I think at like 10:30, but sometimes that unit like goes on a field trip and the bus leaves at like 8:30. So her mom brings her in early. Are you recommending that we change the attendance code for that day to reflect that, or just have her on the sign in? Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm not recommending that as a typical practice. That was an answer to, a kid showing up out of the blue that should not be there. Okay, real quick before I get to you, because I will forget. Christina asked if they still have to be board approved year to year, like every year, and they do not. That's another new thing that we learned, is that they don't have to be board approved every year. So once they are board approved until something changes. Okay. I'm glad that makes your life easier.
So so you're going to run the attendance group for partial day. So partial, what's the other one? Partial week. Is that? Oh, okay. Never mind.
Okay. And to answer your questions, because I know I just went on a whole rant about how if you're getting different answers from different people within the office to say something. So I saw as soon as I said that, people were like, so let me clarify. At one point, and Rhonda will remember this better than me maybe, it was last year, we've noticed in our office that they're kind of like, I don't know, the idea plagues that run through the DPP community on a yearly basis, right? There's a topic that everybody starts talking about, and then they're emailing us about, and they're like, what are you all going to do about this? And we're like, we don't even know what you mean. Okay. And a couple years ago, it was partial day and partial week, and everybody was just losing it over partial day and partial week. And so we had to wind up talking to pretty intensely and multiple times the meetings between Rhonda and a few of us and some people from OSEAL, which is our Office of Special Education, including their policy advisor. And the policy advisor, those are the people that look at the laws that pertain to their office. And so they ultimately tell the rest of us what is what and what to do. Okay, so after we presented all of the stuff about partial day and partial week to the policy advisor and the Office of Special Education, the policy advisor came back and said, you can look for these things you have to look for these things, such as the partial day and partial week are in the IEP, not the conference summary. She did back us up on that. So it can't just be in the conference summary. By the way, it has to be in the IEP. You can check for that. You have to check that it was board approved. You cannot tell the ARC that it has to be in a specific place, and you cannot tell the ARC that they have to have a specific schedule. Okay, so that's why we changed, just to be completely transparent. That same conversation was where it also was made known that we do not have to have those board approvals renewed for those kids every year. And the reason is that the ARC meets every year at least, right? And so if they make any changes to that student's least restrictive environment or whatever their plan is for them to do, then that will be taken care of then, right? So that's the reason why there's different and new information. So it's kind of just how it is in education as a whole. You learn more and you learn different things, and then you change your course. So that's what's going on. Any other questions? Are they, Mark?
They're very valid. So, okay, so how are you going to handle then? All right, so typical district, you audit every 5 years. So the kid gets approved for a partial day, the board approves it, and now they don't have to approve it every year. So then you come back in 5 years, and you know that board approval was 5 years ago, and it's very generic to begin with. So what this is difficult for us to track to meet your needs, I guess is what I'm saying. So what are you going to look for then? Yep. Yep.
Okay, so what I said was that to answer Mark's hypothetical situation about what I will do, this is what I will do. So if a student is in 5th grade, right, when I'm there the first time, they're put on partial day, they're board approved. I come back when they're in 10th grade, they're still on partial day, and that board has not updated that approval for 5 years. I tell the DPP, I'll be there in 2 weeks. I need to see the board approval for this kid, and I need to see their IEP. They're going to pull their most recent IEP, in which it will say the student needs to be on partial day. And then they will reach back in time 5 years previously to those board minutes and produce those. At which point I will say, aha, I see they have been board approved. Good job. Any other, that's right. Any other questions? I mean, it'll be fine, Mark. You're going to be fine. We'll get through this. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Ruthie. Yes. Okay. Again, language, right? You don't, whatever you're doing, if it works for your district, you don't have to stop doing it. Like if you want it board approved every year because you're like, our special ed department has no idea what they're doing, and we're going to make sure that there are as many guardrails for these people as we can get, go for it. Okay. All I'm saying is I'm not auditing it. Okay. Saying you need to stop it versus saying I'm not auditing it are like this far apart. Okay, 2 completely different things. So yes, hear that. I'll put a neon sign on my head. Okay. All right. Partial week is largely the same, except they are an attendance code and not an attendance group. Okay. But as far as the other stuff, it runs exactly the same. We're looking for the same things in the IEP. We're looking for the same things in the board approval. Don't you start. Okay. we're looking for the same. So it all works exactly the same way. One thing that you all need to make sure that you're doing is for those kids that are attending less than full time, because the ARC has set it up that way, make sure that you're going to their enrollment tab, to the special ed field, and checking that fully funded checkbox. Okay? Otherwise, you are not getting full funding for that student. Any other questions? For anybody but Mark, he's cut off. Okay. All right, we are almost done. I know we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. The next thing we're going to look at is the underage ad hoc. We have been having to create that ourselves. Josh has gotten that repaired, and we should be able to pull that just as the state published report this year, which is awesome. That means you all will be able to access it too. So any students that you have that are underage will pull, and we're just going to need to see documentation as to why they were allowed to enroll. So they met your Brigance standard. Okay, awesome. You're going to need to show us their Brigance test. They went to kindergarten in another state and passed kindergarten, and so you enrolled them in first grade here. Sweet. Let us see those records from that other state. So whatever your reason was for enrolling that student, we need to see that. Yes, Rhonda. Hold on, please. Hold, please.
On the transportation question about the T5 and can a T1 ride with their sibling, Roger is in charge of transportation, and he doesn't know of anything that would say they couldn't. So it's really what's in the best interest of the child. And if we find out anything differently, he'll contact me, and then I'll shoot out a message to everyone.
Yeah, so to recap, that was relating to like siblings riding the special ed bus with students who are T5. So Roger says it's fine. And if we find out differently, then we'll let you know. Okay, so that is underage. The next one, page 30, last page, we are going to ask you if you have any students, and yes, we even ask elementary school, and we know it's silly, but it is what it is. We ask you if you have any kids that are leaving campus for any reason to take classes somewhere else. Typically, these are ATCs or CTCs. If you do, then we are going to want to see and have explained to us your process for taking attendance and keeping accurate attendance on those kids. Okay? And that will be the end of your audit. These are some documents that are incredibly helpful that you're going to want to know about. You will get a copy of this PowerPoint, but the pupil attendance manual, you need it. Beginning of your checklist and end of your checklist, you need it. CASES data standards, everything is there. And the monthly attendance reports, Ruthie will go over that this afternoon. We'll skip that. It's just me talking about how bad the website is and how you need to use the search. And then, do you have any questions? I'm sorry if you do, because we don't have time. Okay, now, this is our contact information for all the field staff. If you need anything, that's literally our job. Okay, we are here to help you, to answer your questions, to get you answers if we don't have them. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all being here. Have a great lunch. Ruthie will be with you at 1 o'clock for the attendance clerk training. There are ELA certificates that Rhonda has back there if you need them. You guys have been great. I'll be here all week. Good night.